right, Algebra 2B, here we are with some proofs or simplifying expressions with trigonometry, okay? So it's going to be helpful today. Well, you're going to have to be on this page for your notes, but when you're doing your homework, to be on this page, we can be flipping back and forth and looking at all those identities and formulas, all right? So simplify. So two ways to simplify here. We can either find an exact match that we can kind of substitute in from our identity sheet, or sometimes it's helpful to try to change everything to sine and cosine, the most basic two we have. So tangent is sine over cosine times cosine squared. Okay, and some of you might be able to do this right now. I'm going to go one step further just to make it painfully obvious. So we got sine over cosine times, cosine squared is cosine times cosine. So one of these on the bottom, this one on the bottom is going to cancel out one of them on the top, and our final answer is sine times cosine. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. Okay, slide on over to this one. Cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. Cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. Okay, so this one, we have a nice substitution we can use. Cosecant squared equals cotangent squared plus 1. So we're going to have this spot is going to be cotangent squared plus 1. And then we have minus cotangent squared. So cotangent squared minus cotangent squared is just 1. All right, moving on. Bottom left problem here. I zoom in a touch. Okay, we got cosine times cosecant divided by tangent. So this is one, there's no direct substitution for anything in there. This is one we're going to change everything to cosine and sine. And because I'm anticipating fractions with this one and this one, I'm going to rewrite cosine as cosine over 1. So it's going to be cosine over 1 times cosecant is 1 over sine, big fraction bar. Tangent is sine over cosine. So we can simplify the top, cosine over sine, big fraction bar, sine over cosine. Fraction divided by a fraction, multiply by the reciprocal. So times by the reciprocal, cosine over sine, cosine squared on the top, sine squared on the bottom. Okay, cosine on top, sine on the bottom, that's cotangent. Cosine squared over sine squared is cotangent squared. Kind of a tricky one there. There's a lot going on. A lot going on there. Okay. Bottom right, we got 1 plus cotangent squared over 1 minus cosecant squared. So we're going to have a lot of details going on here. All right. I'm going to leave that 1 alone for now, and I'm just going to mainly work right here. Okay. We're not going to have a very good direct substitution, I don't think. Cotangent squared is going to be cosecant squared minus 1. So maybe you would see that and be able to do it that way. I'll show you this other little thing after we do the long way here. I don't know if very many people would see the other way, the short way. Okay, so cotangent, we're going to leave this plus 1, there's 1 out in the front alone. Cotangent squared is cosine squared over sine squared. big fraction bar. The bottom is 1 minus, okay, cosecant squared is 1 over sine squared. Okay. And I'm going to change my 1 to be sine squared over sine squared. Sine squared over sine squared is 1. Just doing that so I have a convenient denominator so I can just add or subtract straight across. Nothing happening there on the top yet. Cosine squared over sine squared. Okay, then we have sine squared minus 1 over sine squared. Sine squared minus 1. Okay, this is kind of a weird one. This is also, so the short way would have been one weird step, and this way's got one weird step on it too. Okay, so we're like, ooh, sine squared minus 1. Well, cosine squared is 1 minus sine squared. We have sine squared minus 1. So I'm just going to show you this up here. Cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Well, I have sine squared minus 1. So what if I minus the 1 over? So we have 0. And I want to keep the sine squared minus 1. So let's minus cosine squared. And we're going to see that sine squared minus 1 equals negative cosine squared. So sine squared minus 1, this is going to be negative cosine squared. The positive cosine squared was 1 minus sine squared. So sine squared minus 1 the other way around is going to be negative cosine squared. So that was kind of a big jump. All right, so we're taking this. We got cosine squared over sine squared over negative cosine squared over sine squared. Okay, maybe you see it right now. One thing divided by the same thing is going to be 1, but this is a negative, so it would be negative 1. Maybe you don't see it now, and we're going to go through the whole process here. Fraction divided by a fraction, multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, now hopefully we see it. Sine squared cancels out, cosine squared cancels out, negative. So all of this is going to go to negative 1. Don't forget we had that 1 in the front. So we have the positive 1 from the very front, and now we have all of this simplified to minus 1, and our final answer is 0. Okay, a slightly shorter version of, well, not slightly shorter, it is shorter. The shorter version of that would be, if you caught that right away, so cotangent squared would be cosecant squared minus 1, then it's a similar thing. 1 minus cosecant squared minus 1. They're about the same, just flip-flopped. It's going to work out to be a negative 1. I wouldn't have expected you to get that, but you probably would have gone through the long route there of changing everything to sines and cosines and trying to fix that. That was just a really long one, a lot of details. So just like yesterday, you're going to have some that are pretty average, some that are pretty easy, okay? And then you're going to have a couple where you got a lot of little details to keep track of, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging, okay? One more. This is kind of a story problem. Okay. Simplify the formula in terms of cosine theta. So the intensity of light can be found by using this formula. Intensity equals initial intensity minus initial intensity over cosecant squared, where I is the intensity of the light incoming to the second polarized lens. This is for sunglasses. I is the capital I is the intensity of the emerging light, and theta is the angle between the axis of polarization. So we're going to try to convert this into one formula, which is cosine. So I equals IO minus IO over cosecant squared. Okay, so it says we want to write this in terms of cosine, so immediately our attention is probably going to jump to this. I'm going to say, let's factor out the I's, the IO, initial intensity here. So if I take an IO out in front, that's 1 minus 1 over cosecant squared. Okay, 1 over cosecant squared is sine squared. 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. And there we are. Okay, there we are. And maybe put the theta back in now if you want. I just don't use my thetas in there because they turn into zeros. And then I get lost or confused. Use your simplified version to determine the intensity of a light that passes through the second polarizing lens with an axis of 30 degrees to the original. Okay? Lots and lots of words. So I equals, and we're not going to be able to get our final answer because they didn't give us this initial intensity. But we can simplify it a little bit. Times cosine squared of 30 degrees, okay? And let's talk about this. Cosine squared of 30 degrees means do cosine of 30 degrees and square that value. Okay, so hopefully from our unit circle, we remember cosine of 30 degrees. Don't type it in. Hopefully off your unit circle, it's radical 3 over 2. And we got to square that. That's going to make this be a regular 3, and 2 squared is 4. So this is as far as we can get. It didn't give us our initial intensity here, times 3/4. All right, one last problem. I know this isn't in the notes, but we're going to do one more problem. Fresh from your homework, 2 times cosecant squared minus cotangent squared, okay? So we got 2 main strategies. Number 1 is to be able to convert everything to sines and cosines and try to simplify from there, okay? That can take a little bit of time and can be a little detail-oriented, but it's tried and true and should work out all the time. Another shorter way is if you can find a substitution to make that's right off of your identity. Off your identity sheet, okay? So we got cosecant squared and cotangent squared. Okay? Cosecant squared equals cotangent squared plus 1. Okay, that's going to be cotangent squared plus 1. And we still have our minus cotangent squared. Okay, cotangent squared minus cotangent squared, 2 times, all that's left in there is 1, and we have 2. All right. Little 14-minute video. You guys should have some time left for homework. Take a look at that. 13.1, day 2, we're looking at page 876. 21 through 33, skip number 27. All right. Enjoy, and we'll see you guys on Friday.